Thank you so much for having me today at the Sorenson Impact Summit. Appreciate the opportunity to come and share a little bit more about what we've been working on. My name is Andy Stoll. I am a social entrepreneur and currently a senior program officer at the Ewing, Marion Kauffman Foundation. Kauffman Foundation is a private family foundation located in Kansas City, Missouri. We spend our energy focused on entrepreneurship, education, and the civic infrastructure of Kansas City. And we also have a national strategy focused on entrepreneurship. Today, I've been asked to come talk about the emerging professional practice of entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is a set of work we've been focused on in the foundation for a number of years. Entrepreneurial ecosystem building has applications in entrepreneurial support, economic development, community development, and actually we're seeing people take on this practice from many, many different sectors. It's especially important to think about in the conversations we're having around building more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and how I came to this work. And then I'm going to dig a little bit more into the nitty gritty of what entrepreneurial ecosystem building is and why it's important. So first, my story. Let's go back to the age of 23. I was a recent college graduate, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to change the world. But I realized very quickly upon my college graduation that I had a bit of a problem, which is I wanted to change the world, but I actually didn't really have a clue how it really worked because I had spent most of my life in a classroom up to that point, and I never actually even had left the United States. So I decided I should travel. So I looked around at all the ways that you can travel when you're 23. You can join the Peace Corps, you can backpack across Europe, you can volunteer in an orphanage in Costa Rica. And when I looked at all those things, I realized there was no possible way I could choose just one of those things. So I decided I'd do them all. Seems obvious. I took a trip around the world. The problem was that I didn't have any money. In fact, I owed the federal government at the time about $25,000 in student loans, which, if you think about it, is actually a great reason to leave the country. So I decided I'd set a goal of 3 years and I'd get a really normal job and I'd just save up money. So at the age of 26, almost 3 years later to the day, I quit my job. I sold everything I owned, and with a backpack, a Virgin passport, and a one-way ticket to China, I just left. I had never been outside of the country in my entire life, and I was scared. The goal was to go around the world for a year, and I ended up coming back 4 years later. I lived, worked, and volunteered in 40 different countries. The goal was to live like the locals, to see how people live in the world. And so I did all sorts of really interesting things. I lived in a Buddhist temple in Korea. I worked in a dress factory in Bangkok. I got a couple jobs in Bollywood. I had an undergraduate degree in filmmaking, so I worked in Bollywood, the Hollywood of India. I eventually got invited in front of the camera, and I do not act. And I played an 18th century British soldier in one of the most expensive Bollywood movies ever made. I lived in a mud hut village in Zambia with a guy who taught me how they farm maize. I worked on a 500,000 acre cattle ranch in Australia. I joined a team doing cataract surgeries in some of the most remote islands in the South Pacific. I didn't do the surgeries, I just took pictures. But I saw the world. And over 4 years, I traveled, lived, worked in 40 different countries, and I saw a lot of things. And today I want to share with you 4 patterns that I saw during that time that I think are relevant to our conversations today. So I traveled around the world from 2006 to 2010, and halfway in between those dates was 2008. And y'all remember 2008. And I think looking back on it, 2008 was an incredibly important year. And at the time of its happening, I thought would be the most significant moment of crisis that probably happened in our society in my lifetime. Little did I know 2020 and 2021 were still coming. But I have a hunch that we'll look back at this time and at 2008 in particular as a marker of a very significant shift in the world. And we're talking sort of human history here. So I'd say 2008, give or take 50 years. And I think the events of this last a year and a half or so will be part of that shift. But I believe we'll look back at 2008, give or take 50 years, and we'll really recognize that in this time we're in now, the world really is shifting. And that shift that I think is happening is actually marking the end of the industrial age, and we are shifting into a new human era or epoch. There have only been about 4 human eras. If you really look at it, we were hunter-gatherers, then we moved into farms, we became mostly an agrarian society, then we moved into cities, which is really what fueled the industrial age. And I'd like to make the case, or I want to make the case, that we're shifting into a whole nother era. I'm not the only one saying this and the only one making this case. If you look around, a lot of economists and thinkers are recognizing that there are seismic shifts happening within our culture, and we're shifting into a new era, but we haven't really come up with a name for that era because we just got here and many of us don't even realize we're there. But for our purposes today, I'm going to borrow a name from the writer Seth Godin. He calls it the connected age, the age that we're transitioning into. This connected age is really driven by the exponential increase in technology and connectivity over the last 100 years, if not more. The age of, or this connected age, has a set of values that are central to it that are actually very different than the values that were central to our societies and our communities in the industrial age. And that's really important to consider as we think about how we're going to rebuild and reinvent and put back together our communities after the events of 20 and 2021. So to help with that and sort of inform that, I want to share with you 4 patterns that I saw traveling around the world between 2006 and 2010, which I think will help us think through some of the application of some of the things that I've been doing at the Kauffman Foundation and perhaps some of the work that you've been doing in your communities. So the first pattern I saw traveling around the world through 40 different countries over 4 years is that today, entrepreneurship and innovation have been democratized. And what I mean by that is if you have an idea in your head of something you want to create, the barriers to entry to turn that idea into reality have just collapsed. It is still difficult and very challenging to make your idea a super and extreme success, but the barriers to entry and through the access to tools and education and learning and knowledge have never made it easier. The second pattern I saw over and over again through my travels over 4 years in 40 different countries is this notion that the individual has been globalized. And what I mean by that is in the industrial age, the corporations were globalized, meaning a company could find resources anywhere in the world, put them together, remix them, and make a thing and sell it or distribute it or get it out anywhere in the world. This right in the connected age is being afforded to nearly every individual. The third pattern I saw traveling over 4 years through 40 different countries is that networks are replacing hierarchies. And I don't mean to say that hierarchies aren't important, but I'm saying that networks and the power of networks are replacing the power of hierarchies. So if you even just take the banking and financial crisis of 2008, or you look at even how the spread of COVID and some of the solutions and some of the things that we've needed to do to address the global pandemic have relied on networks. Networks are also incredibly important when you think about the shift from traditional media to social media. Even when you think about things like movements, so whether you're talking about Black Lives Matter or you're thinking about the Arab Spring, when you think about them, you don't come up with one individual, one lone leader, though there are certainly leaders that have moved and amplified those movements. But these movements are actually built and based on networks. Even if you think about terrorism and terrorist groups and terrorist cells, these quick, small, often nimble, sometimes scrappy groups are taking on some of the largest hierarchies in the world, say the US military, to some success. And so the US military has actually had to retool some of its own strategies to work in a more networked model. The last pattern I saw over and over again as I traveled around the world for 4 years through 40 different countries, which I probably don't need to tell most of you, but is this idea that geography doesn't have a monopoly on good ideas. And what I mean by that is not all the smart people live in Silicon Valley and New York and London and Berlin and Shanghai, but many of these places, many of those communities have intentionally built systems that support people with ideas. But smart people live everywhere. And in the past, many of these individuals had to go to certain cities or certain communities to help turn their ideas into reality. But in the connected age, there is an opportunity for communities everywhere to build these types of systems. So the thesis for my talk today is really that the communities that will thrive in the new era are those that help all people make new ideas happen. Given the changes in our society, communities must develop intentional strategies to think about how they're going to support people with ideas to turn them into reality. So Then it leads to the question, who are these people with these new ideas? And the answer is entrepreneurs. And at the Kauffman Foundation, the way we think about that today, we often call them the makers, the doers, and the dreamers. So I am talking an extremely broad and wide definition of entrepreneurship. Yes, that includes high growth, innovation-driven companies, technology startups, but I'm also talking about micro enterprises, mom and pop organizations, social entrepreneurs, and all the different flavors of entrepreneurs you find in your community. So the Kauffman Foundation has spent about 25 years funding research into entrepreneurship. And let me sum up some of that research in sort of high-level bullet points. Entrepreneurs drive progress. Entrepreneurship empowers individuals, improves standards of living throughout a community, and creates jobs, wealth, and innovation in the economy. Entrepreneurs don't just benefit themselves and their families, but the communities in which they live. Research has really demonstrated the impact of entrepreneurs and the positive impacts on communities. You add that to what I said earlier, which is entrepreneurship has been democratized. And these two facts alone signal to me that we should have all sorts of entrepreneurship all over the place. But our research at the Kauffman Foundation also shows this stunning fact, that entrepreneurship rates in the United States have seen really 20 years of stagnation. If this is a measure of a national rate of early stage entrepreneurship, part of the Kauffman indicators of entrepreneurship. And this graph, if you can't see the small details, looks at the national rate of entrepreneurship, which is the percentage of population that starts a new business between 1996 and today. And you'll see, generally speaking, as a trend over that period, it has pretty much remained flat. Or in 2020 last year, that rate was 0.38, which means roughly just under 4 out of every 1,000 people. Now, you will note that the 2020 number is significantly higher than the 2019 number and towers above pretty much all the entrepreneurship rates of the last previous few decades. 2020 was clearly a different year, and while it's exciting to see that rate of entrepreneurship, one thing I want to double click on just to sort of highlight here within the data is, while that number of people starting new businesses went up last year during the first year of the pandemic, what we also see and what we also measure at the Kauffman Foundation is opportunity versus necessity entrepreneurship. So people who start businesses because they see an opportunity, or people who start a business because they need to. And if you look at that number, the opportunity shares of new entrepreneurship, which is the percentage of new entrepreneurs who create a business because they wanted to, not because they had to, you will see that number also significantly dropped in 2020. And so what this means is that, generally speaking, more people started businesses because they had to create themselves a job or income, versus they saw an opportunity to become entrepreneurs. Of course, I'm hopeful that the entrepreneurial rate will continue to stay high in the years coming, and that perhaps all the events of the last couple of years has signaled a shift in the rate of entrepreneurship in America, but only time will tell, and only work by leaders like you and your communities to support entrepreneurs will help us support more entrepreneurs to contribute to our communities. So entrepreneurship rates in the United States have seen about 20 years of stagnation. This has been exacerbated by barriers facing specific populations, and it's why inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem as a topic for this event is incredibly important. Women, people of color, immigrants, rural communities, LGBTQ identifying entrepreneurs perform or sort of have more barriers in their way than most entrepreneurs, and the playing field isn't level. So because these folks are not able to fully participate and succeed in entrepreneurship, this also has a lot of negative impacts on their own well-being and their life, but also the well-being and life of our communities. And so further research, if you gather it together, really says that the whole economy suffers when everyone isn't able to participate. The research really shows that the stagnation in entrepreneurship and the barriers that are in the way for a significant amount of entrepreneurs in our population contributes to all sorts of other challenges across our communities. So this is incredibly important to keep in mind, especially the notion of creating more inclusive and more equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems, because the changes in demographics in the United States will have a significant impact on our economy in the coming years. The population of the United States is becoming older and more racially diverse. And by 2055, the United States will not have a single racial or ethnic majority. So if what the group we call minorities today make up a majority of our population, and they are not able to participate in our economy or face undue barriers to becoming entrepreneurs, that is not just going to affect communities of color or women or rural communities or immigrants, but it's going to have a significant impact on all of us. As we look across entrepreneurship and we look at the rates of the sort of stagnated rate of entrepreneurship, it is clear that traditional methods of encouraging entrepreneurship are not really producing the desired results. In many communities, we're seeing more and more entrepreneurial support organizations, and entrepreneurship has become much more celebrated in our culture in the last 20 years. But again, the rates of new businesses and new starts have stagnated pretty much across the country, with the exception of a few regions and a few cities. So we need to think, and we need to find a new approach to how we support entrepreneurs. The good news is that approach has been emerging over the course of the last couple of decades, and is happening in communities across the United States as well as around the world. This notion of entrepreneurial ecosystem building. It is a new emerging approach in economic, community, and entrepreneurial development in the connected age, and it has applications in sectors well beyond just those three. So what is entrepreneurial ecosystem building? Some of you are probably deeply familiar with it. Some of you may be hearing about it for the first time. So I want to give us a shared mental model to think about what is an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So this is Maria. Maria has a great idea for a business, but like all entrepreneurs, she doesn't know all the things she needs to know to build her business, and she has lots of questions. The good news is out in her community are people and organizations that have the answers to her questions and can help her gain access to the resources she needs to start and grow her company. So Maria's job as an entrepreneur is actually very straightforward, but it's incredibly complex. Maria's got to run around in the right order as quick as possible to all the people to get the answers to her questions and the access to the resources she needs to start and grow her company, right? She's got to do that before she runs out of energy, effort, hope, money, or her spouse says, honey, it's time to get a real job. So our job, if we think about how can our communities better support people who are turning ideas into reality? How do we better support these entrepreneurs? Our job is very straightforward, but it's actually fairly complex, which is we've got to take all of these resources in our community and we've got to connect them together before Maria shows up. We've got to, I always call it, grease the skids between those connections so that Maria can quickly move around to find the resources she needs and the answers to her questions within our community. So how do we grease the skids? This may be a little surprising to some people, but the answer is actually culture, a culture that says trust, collaborate, help each other, give before you get, a culture that says dream big, grow here, try stuff, fail, get up, you can be an entrepreneur, right? And in a community that is well connected, when Maria shows up, she'll quickly be able to find and be routed to the places and the people that can help her answer her questions and find the resources she needs to build her business. This is how an entrepreneurial ecosystem works. So culture is a primary driver of economic development in the connected age, the culture that connects together those resources and helps entrepreneurs thrive. So let's talk a little bit about an entrepreneurial culture. What does that look like? An entrepreneurial culture has many different elements to it, but if you've been in one, I think these will be very familiar to you. An entrepreneurial culture is a culture that says dream big, grow here, everyone is invited, help each other, open doors and listen, give before you get, pay it forward, collaborate, experiment, take risks, fail, get back up again, recreate here. This culture can exist inside of an organization. Many times you'll find it inside of an entrepreneurial incubator or accelerator program. And what we're talking about is how do you expand that culture out to propagate into and across in a community in a way that is inclusive and open to all to participate. So we have an equation at the Kauffman Foundation we like to use to remember the importance of the culture in entrepreneurial ecosystem building. This P plus C equals E, write that down. People plus culture equals everything. So even if you have all great parts of an ecosystem, a wonderful accelerator and an incubator and a small business development center, and banks and investors and a credit union and a university, if those parts do not work together, you will not have a successful and thriving ecosystem. The culture of the place is what connects it together, and it is the connection between the parts in an ecosystem where the magic lies. So the way we've thought about supporting entrepreneurs in our more traditional way are on the left side of this chart here, right? So for many decades in many communities, we've thought about we need to support entrepreneurs by providing more financial capital, technology, technical training, incubators, policy incentives, among other things. And yes, while those things are important elements of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, we also need to pay attention to the things on the right. We need more community building, more social capital and trust, more connectivity, more diversity and inclusion, and more peer learning. It is the connections of the parts that create the magic in the ecosystem. So again, the communities that will thrive in this new era are those that best help all people make new ideas happen. So many communities, they have the elements of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, but they remain nascent or disconnected. Ecosystem builders are the people, the leaders, the community leaders who step up and consider the whole system by enhancing each element and the collaborative culture and connectivity across the whole system. Ecosystem builders really help move a community from disconnected to connected. Ecosystem builders create invisible infrastructure. It's not like traditional infrastructure. It's not about physical spaces or fancy buildings, pools of capital, or big institutions, though those are all parts of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Instead, these ecosystem builders focus on building consistent, collaborative human engagement across the entire system. What we found in our time at the Kauffman Foundation, exploring ecosystem building across the United States and around the world, is that, like entrepreneurs, ecosystem builders come in many forms. They come across, or they come from many different sectors. They might be in entrepreneurial support or economic development. They might be venture capitalists, community builders. They might be entrepreneurs themselves. Really, anyone can be an ecosystem builder as long as you care enough to build your community. One of the other key things we've learned in our time working on this at the foundation is that ecosystem building is a team sport. Not one individual, not one organization can build an entire entrepreneurial ecosystem. It takes a group, a team with shared and collaborative leadership working together, a diverse team with different skill sets, perspectives, and understandings of how entrepreneurship and ecosystems work to really be able to build a sustainable and equitable and an inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. So if you're working alone in a community, to build an ecosystem, find a team. If you're just getting the conversation started, start with a small core group of folks who come together and begin your efforts there in aligning that set of leaders that will ultimately propagate out the work into and across the community. So to conclude my presentation, I want to share a video that we put together for an event we did last year called the eShip Summit that brought together some of the early adopters of entrepreneurial ecosystem building. It sums up many of the things that I've said, but I also encourage you, if you like the video, to share it with folks in your community. Let's check it out. An entrepreneurial ecosystem is all of the resources that surround entrepreneurs as they move their business forward. Ecosystem building is about getting those resources and folks in the community to work together by creating an environment of trust and collaboration, supporting big ideas, supporting people when they take risks, supporting people when they fail, creating that right culture that is ripe for entrepreneurial success. Because of the changing nature of our economy and our communities, we have to take new approaches in ways that will make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate. Traditional ways of supporting entrepreneurs looked at the individual parts of an ecosystem. Ecosystem builders take a systems view. They put entrepreneurs front and center in that system, and they say, how can I make our community more supportive of entrepreneurs of all types? So the role of an ecosystem builder is really a systems leader. It really takes leaders stepping up who care about the whole system and not just the individual parts of the ecosystem. Entrepreneurial ecosystem builders come from economic development, community development, libraries, universities. They come from different sectors. They could be entrepreneurs themselves. Anyone who cares about the success of entrepreneurs in their community. The challenge is that there's thousands of people that are working on building their entrepreneurial ecosystem, but they were doing it what I would call custom and bespoke ways. There's very little consensus on some basic elements. How do we create the environment in which entrepreneurs in our community can thrive?
What are the processes? What are the steps? How do you build an ecosystem? How do you measure the health of an ecosystem? And I think as that practice of ecosystem building matures, it becomes more available to more communities. The only way we're going to figure out how to do this is to figure it out together.
If you like that video and want to share it with others, you can find it on the Kauffman Foundation YouTube channel. You can also see a bit.ly link just above, which should take you directly there. We also have a draft playbook for entrepreneurial ecosystem builders. It's very much a work in progress. You can check that out at the link above. And we also publish a twice monthly newsletter where we share promising practices, tools, programs, and grant opportunities for entrepreneurial ecosystem building efforts at the link above. Thank you again for joining for this session. I hope it was interesting. Wishing you the best of luck with the rest of the summit. Thank you very much.